Well, hey there guys, it's Metro, and with Legion coming out in just a few weeks here, I wanted to talk about one of the most significant lists that you could ever have, alright, since dungeons are becoming a main progression path. And recently I've seen a lot of people a little bit backwards on how they approach dungeons. I wanted to make a quick list for you guys on a bunch of points that I think are going to make you a better dungeon player. Sadly, I think a lot of people don't know how to maximize their play in dungeons. So over the time of being a dungeon connoisseur, right, with challenge modes and then going into Mythic Plus on the beta, these are a bunch of tips that I think can help you out. So I've broken them down into beginner, immediate, advanced, okay? But this one tip I'm going to give right now is elevation beyond all of that. It's not relevant to any of those categories because it's something that's inherent in the game. And it is, so this first tip here, okay? Healers and tanks need to be maxing their DPS, all right? A lot of people seem to be confused on this. I've made a lot of videos on this, but tanks have for a long time been able to carry the DPS, even in challenge modes. Now I find myself regularly doing more AoE than any other player in the group, even on good groups. And as now a healer can do in Legion, they can do a lot of damage, all right? So the tank and the healer need to be able to maximize their damage. In a lot of ways, that involves the tank maximizing their healing as well. And then, of course, the healer spending globals wisely. So people have said that's related. They've done this in Final Fantasy XIV. I've not played the game, but I guess if you're already in that mindset, then that's good, because that is definitely one tip that I can give you that is definitely mandatory for 5-man progression. So we'll get right into it with the beginner tips. I have 4 for each category. So number 4 for beginner tips is coordination is king, especially of interrupts and things like external CDs or that type of utility. I've done a lot of groups, not just one, many groups over the past 2 expansions where, you know, you need an interrupt rotation, and I say, all right, we're all in vent, 5 of us in vent. I say, all right, who's got next? Call it out, call it out. Okay, nobody got it. All right, who's got next? Oh, all 3 people use theirs. Now we don't have one for the subsequent, you know? So it's like, stuff like that is a massive lack of communication, and the coordination especially is very poor. So if you're gonna start doing 5-mans, you're a beginner, make sure you're coordinating, saying like, all right, I used hand to sack, all right, I used pain suppression, I got a CD up, etc., stuff like that. Especially as a tank, it's like, I'm good here, I got big CD, don't heal me, damage, do damage, stuff like that. And especially interrupts, it's like, all right, I got next, who's next, and somebody's like, all right, I got it, I can do next, I got next to, etc. Very important, guys. A lot of people don't understand that, but it is very paramount to completing dungeons properly. The number 3 is going to be understand how to AoE as your class and spec. A lot of people only do raids, you know, serious raiders or even just LFR people. Most of your challenge is coming from a raid boss, so you never actually learn how to AoE. But in dungeons, the trash is about at least 70% of the time you're going to spend in the dungeon on the trash, and give or take depending, but usually you're spending a lot of time on trash, so you need to be able to AoE properly, and a lot of people don't seem to understand this. A really good example is like people who played Enhancement this expansion in my guild. They knew how to play their class in the raids, they knew how to cleave, but they didn't know how to properly burst with AoE. They were able to do good damage on bosses, but not on AoE, even though the spec is pretty much tailored for AoEing. So that is number 3 for sure, because if you don't know how to do AoE, you're going to struggle in dungeons. And number 2 is dungeons are long, so you should be using your CDs as much as possible. This is another thing that I think a lot of new, like people not akin to challenging dungeon content would be struggling with. You expect to be, you know, doing bosses that are challenging, but it's actually the trash and the whole of the dungeon that is challenging. And because there's a lot of downtime in between, you know, you're running. So typically you wouldn't want to use your CD. You wouldn't want to maximize your CDs like on a boss fight, right? So say an 8-minute boss fight, you pop your CDs on the pull, and then the second usage is either going to line up with another CD or you're going to use it immediately. In a 5-man, you pop, say, on the pull, but this 8-minute window is the dungeon start. So we start the dungeon, you pop everything on the pull, and then, you know, after you kill the pack, you have like a, say, 20-second window where you're not even fighting anything, you know? So that's actually value for your CD. You got value out of that. And then the next pack, you don't have a CD, but then subsequent pack, you have it back up again. So instead of saying, I'm going to save these things for the boss, the 5 to 10 minutes that you're taking to do the trash before the boss, you could have used your CDs at least twice by then. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't really think about. But the number one tip for beginners coming into challenging dungeon content in Legion is that you need to be looking into different talents or even a spec to play maximally. A lot of people don't do this. All right, I've run dungeons with a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm a raider. Look at me. I'm 13 to 13 Mythic. I can do exactly what I do in raids in dungeons. And that is not true. I think a great example is an Arcane Mage, right? Like, Arcane Mage is insane. I mean, there's no question that they are the best damage dealing spec in Warlords of Draenor, right? But if you brought them into a 5-man, they would be pretty shit. Literally almost any other class or spec would be better than them because their CDs are so standstill reliant and obviously a bit of RNG, and that's not how a dungeon works. So if you're a player who's serious about dungeons, you're gonna have to consider playing your class and spec differently, and you may even have to you may have to try things that are a little out of the box for you. But that's all the beginners tips. Next up is intermediate. So for the player who's done dungeons a bit and has already mastered what we've talked about, these are 4 intermediate tips. Number 4 being elevate the pace of the dungeon at all times. All right, this should be something that all 5 players are looking to do. The tank especially, you should always be looking to pull as large and convenient as possible. Without the rampant use of things like gore fiends, it's a little bit more difficult in Legion, but of course blood does still have it. It's just a little bit weaker. But anything that you can do to maximize your CD usage and elevate the pace of the dungeon entirely is definitely needed. Basically, any time that you have, like, the first pull of any dungeon, I always say, is the most important, because if we maximize our usage on that pull, if we get everything out of, everything proccing, all trinkets, weapon enchants, and pre-pot and CDs are all up, then that could be the most important pull of the dungeon. And going forward, it needs to be as well. And just a little side tip there is, healers, you guys need to be in front of the group. So progression along a straight line from point A to B to C. We're starting at A. You guys need to be on the B side of A. Do you understand what I mean there? You can't be behind the group, because if you need to stop for some reason, then you have to catch up severely. So that's a good tip for healers too, specifically. Now, number 3 on this list is uptime. If you don't know what that means, what I'm talking about is being able to do damage very often, all right, for 100% of the time the boss or the mob you're fighting is engaged. So that is, by the transference property, tells you that mobility and movement speed is actually a DPS increase in 5-mans. A lot of people don't understand that. In fact, I did challenge modes very recently with people who were, I was counting down, I'm 3, 2, 1, pull, pre-pot, etc. And they're like 10 yards away from the boss. It's like, what are you guys doing? This is a DPS loss, right? You have to be as close to the mobs as possible. So when you enter combat, the first, you're wasting seconds of damage there. It's called DPS. So any second you're not attacking is a DPS loss. And I don't think a lot of people fully understand that. So make sure you're using your class's mobility and your own brain power to get as much damage in as possible. Now, number 2 on this one here is you need to learn to use your utility properly and be vocal with it as well. We already talked about coordination, but this goes one step even further. All right, now I'm talking about things like leg sweep. All right, a very strong AoE stun needs to be used properly. For example, all these mobs are spread out. We pull a pack of 6 mobs and only 3 of them are ever going to get hit by it on the pull. But if you wait another 3-4 seconds, they'll group up and you'll be able to leg sweep all 6 of them. That is a better usage and coordinative use of the ability. So you need to be saying things like that, talking about this. A lot of people will try to use these as like fast as possible, like if it's a raid, but that is not what you got to do in 5-mans, guys. talking about now also things like Dark Sim and Reflect from Hunters and Shaman in the WOD challenge modes. Those things are removed in Legion, guys, 100% removed. But I can guarantee you that as the game progresses, there is going to be something like that. Probably not exactly like that, but something a class can do that is very specific to them, that if you do it at the wrong time, you're really going to lose a lot of efficacy. And the reason I'm talking about efficacy is because, for example, we did Iron Docks, and the second boss in there, right, the group of the three dude, the orcs and the goblin. That second, the big guy, Okrog or something like that, you can reflect his firewall. And because, people, like, they both try to do it and both missed it or something like that, well, we just lost like a minute there, guys. You know what I mean? That's a very bad thing. People don't seem to understand that. They're like, oh, I just made a mistake. Well, that mistake just cost the group a lot. And if we were coordinative about it, only one of you would have made the mistake. You know what I'm saying? So that is a very important part of a 5-man progression, that it kind of goes under the radar for a lot of people. They think, it's just a mistake, no big deal. But when you're being serious about it, we have to mitigate these mistakes. We have to make sure these mistakes do not hurt us severely. So anyway, the number one on this list here, okay? This is like the biggest tip I can give to any entry-level dungeoneer. Pre-pot every opportunity. All right, if you don't know what pre-pot means, what I'm talking about is using a potion before combat. You would do that because it does not incur the large, but basically when you use a potion in combat, you're not allowed to use a second potion in that combat. So the 1 minute CD on using the potion won't incur until combat is dropped. But if you used it before combat, then the 1 minute CD would start, and it would be up probably by the time the pack is over. So realistically, you're using a pre-pot on every other pull. And even, we'll talk about how to metagame CD on pre-pots, but yeah, so almost never use a pot in combat, guys, even on bosses, like unless you're sure that you're not fighting anything dangerous for the next potentially minute after the combat, right? Like pre-potting is exceptionally important because the CD is recharging while you're fighting, but potting in combat, then you have to wait. So that's the number one DPS gain of any 5-man situation. It was even more potent in challenge modes because you were scaled down so severely. The potions were obviously made to be very strong at low item levels, so that was very good. But in Legion, obviously we're going to gain item level fast, and there's some discrepancy on whether or not these potions are going to be good or not. But either way, it's going to be a damage gain, guys. So make sure you're maximizing your potion usage in 5-mans. And now we come to the advanced tips. These tips are for people who already have taken on all of my advice and feel that they know a good amount about how to play the game in general, and now are ready for very specific dungeon, challenging dungeon specific tips. Number 4 on this list, guys, is going to be learn the skips and exploits to minimize the difficulty of the dungeon. I think if anybody's done a challenge mode in the past, you understand that the dungeon is not set up for you to do every single pull in the dungeon. Traditionally people would go pull, then boss. But in challenge modes, you have to make much better use of your time, and there's even some things that you could exploit along the way in previous examples. So we have one good example here as Everbloom. All right, hopefully everybody's done Everbloom and Warlords of Draenor, but if you didn't, there was basically these 2 jump skips that you can do. You can kind of like wall climb up these 2 little areas, and the first one allowed you to skip probably at least 5 minutes worth of trash, if not longer, even for good groups. It was this padding, like a mini boss that you can skip. And then the second one allowed you to skip like a whole wing of the dungeon. So yeah, that was another at least 5 minutes of trash. If you did not do these skips in Everbloom challenge mode, there was basically no chance you would ever get gold, no matter how good you were. And you'd also pull like double the mob count. And the other example now of an actual exploit, so that's a skip if you ask me, and then an exploit here was Shadowpan Monastery. If you guys did that in challenge modes, on top of the mob count, there was also this requirement to click these floating Pandaren body spirit things. They were basically like being killed by their Shah, like I don't know, some Shah influence or something. And you needed to click 4, okay? So that meant that you needed to kill these trash packs that did not give mob count, and then in order to click the shadow pan thing. But when you would click it, the mobs would die, they would disappear, and for some reason, you could, it counted if 4 people clicked it at the exact same time. So what we would do is, we would CC, there'd be like 3 mobs guarding the spirit, there'd be, 3 people ready to CC, all 3 of them, fear them, shackle undead, whatever it was, and then we'd count down, and at 1, all 5 people would try to click it, and it'd be very likely that at least 4 of them would succeed, and that was it. We just exploited that entire mechanic, and it was like that for the entire expansion, guys. So I can fucking guarantee it, that there's going to be something like this in Legion, at least in one of the dungeons, that are going to severely help you out. A really good, small example I've already seen is, those cups of beer in Halls of Valor. If you throw them at the mobs, they will fight each other. A very good little skip that you can do with those is to pull all the trash that you need to in that long hallway going back and forth. And then when you're right before the door that leads you up to Odin's room, you throw one of the cups of beer at the guy on either the left or the right, the 2 big dudes guarding the hallway. And then you just run by the left one. And I already see people screw this up so often, they just run through the middle of both of them, and the one on the right is not CC'd, so he aggroes and we have to pull them. So that's a very big tip. Learning the skips is extremely important, okay? Number 3 is then even further learning every single pull of the dungeon. You need to do this, guys. A lot of people I've done groups recently and they're like, oh, I've never done this dungeon before. It's like, then what the fuck are we doing challenge modes for? You know what I mean? Like, this is like doing mythic raiding without ever doing normal raiding, guys. That's not an option, all right? If you're gonna be serious about doing these dungeons, you need to learn them inside and out. This means watching other players do them. This means doing them on lower difficulties to find ways that you could kind of skip or jump or, exploit like we talked about. And this is also going to help severely with CD usage and pacing, because if you know exactly, like I've done some of these dungeons so many times now that it's like, I know them perfectly. I know exactly how I want to do them. It may not be how others do them, but I have maximized my CD usage to a T. It's to a science, really. Math, actually, so that's really important, and you need to have that level of experience, because if you don't, you're severely hurting yourself and your group. And number 2 tip I have here, which I think a lot of people don't really understand why this is so important, is stop before bosses to wait, less than 30 seconds, I'd say. Ideally, we'd be waiting 15 to 20. That's kind of like the upper limit. 30 is pushing it, but never wait longer than that. For CDs to line up on the pull of bosses, okay? Or even really difficult trash pulls. And the reason you want to do this is, especially when you use Lust, when you pop everything on the pull, including, your previously trinket ICDs, these would be, ticking over in that 20-second window, weapon enchants as well, which are now gone, but things like that are going to be ticking over. If you can pop everything on the pull, your burst exponentiates, and that exponentially reduces the time the boss is going to live. So waiting 20 seconds when you can then kill a boss who, would be challenging. So say like the boss took a minute when you just pulled properly and everybody just used their CDs as they came up. The boss lasts a full minute, and he does mechanics that aren't something you can deal with easily, which decreases your DPS. Well, if you just popped everything and killed him in 30 seconds, even though you waited 30 seconds, you have a much higher % chance of completing the encounter because of the mechanics that we didn't have to deal with. And of course, everything is just faster for the boss in general. So I don't think a lot of people understand that, and it's going to be even more important now in Legion, because you can't reset Lust by dying, apparently. Now, I assume that's going into live. It's on the beta currently, but if you die on purpose in a Mythic Plus, you do not get the sated debuff removed. So, yeah, that's an interesting change there, and it's gonna make things even more important, okay? But the number 1 tip I can give for an advanced player looking to take dungeons serious, and I'll explain serious, but is to bring the best group you can. So unfortunately, this means that you and your buddies sometimes are not going to be able to play together. You're not going to be able to just walk in together and say, all right, we're good. We're all great friends. We're fast friends. We played together a lot. All as we are is going to be perfect. That is just unfortunately not a reality in 5-man content, because with only 5 players, all of you need to be making the biggest impact you can make. So on that spectrum, a player, say, pulling more than 100% of their weight, like 150% of their weight, is doing so much more, because 150 times 1/5 is so much more than 150 times 1/20th, right? So in a raid, it's important that everybody's communicative and coordinated, but one single player cannot carry nearly as hard as in 5-mans. And that's going to make a big deal, because if you got one dude who's kind of slowing you down, then that's a much bigger deal. I'm going to say this now, I think it really helps to have a dungeon alt. In terms of being serious about Mythic Plus, so in challenge mode, I would say being serious about it, there was 2 levels, was finding everything you can do to make gold as easy as possible for people who are not prepared. Like boosting, I think, is one way to be serious about challenge modes in Legion, or in Warlords of Draenor and below. And then the other way is like 5-man coordination, where you're trying to push for world best times, and then that really blurs the line there. So those are 2 ways to get serious. But in Legion, I would consider being serious about EPing, like pushing plus higher, like 15, 16, 20, 25, etc., as high as you can possibly go. Like, you don't care about the gear at this point, you care about the success. And that is being serious about them, because just completing them for gear is obviously like something that everybody wants to do anyway. It's just like raids. Like, some people raid because they want to get the gear, like that's all they care about is the gear. Other people raid because they want to be the best they can be, and they want to see success within themselves. So that's going to require you to think outside the box in more ways than one. For example, you're playing a rogue in Warlords of Draenor. Well, they're alright. Combat's not bad. It's actually pretty good for challenge modes, but guess what? Enhance is 6 times fucking better. So you're going to roll an Enhance instead, and you're going to get a full BIS set on that, and that is your dedication. That is you preparing and being ready to play the best you can be. So I think, that kind of shakes people up a bit. They're like, oh, my class isn't good enough for 5-mans. Well, yeah, now you've been given more affordability here with the removal of like group-wide buffs. The comp is a little bit less important, but you're still going to need a Lust, and you're still going to need 3 fucking heavy hitters, man. As much AoE and then burst damage as possible. So thanks for sticking along for this whole one. It's been pretty long, but I feel like these are really important tips, especially with 5-man's going to be a real serious part of progression. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'll be happy to answer any single one of them. But otherwise, enjoy Legion, guys. I think it's really going to be the best expansion we've ever seen, and I'm really, really excited about all the dungeon changes.